Hello and welcome to Podcast Pete's podcast, where I, Podcast Pete, talk about podcasts and podcasting, giving you real practical tips when it comes to making, publishing, marketing and monetizing your podcast. I am only of interest to you if you're looking at creating a professional sounding podcast and you're wanting to attract the biggest audience that you can. If you've got a question or you just fancy a chat or you want to tell me about your new podcast, you can get in touch on our Facebook, on my Facebook page, on Twitter at PodcastPete2, on Instagram as well at PodcastPete2, or on email, therealpodcastpete@gmail.com. So this week, I want to talk about something that a client came to me and talked about, because outside of this, I run a company that helps businesses make podcasts. And I wanted to do this podcast, Podcast Pete's podcast, for you, the people who, you don't run a business, you just want to do a podcast about whatever it is you want to do a podcast about, whether it's, you know, my favourite one of knitting, or whether it's about films or books or pop culture or whatever it is, but there's no sales behind it. There's no business behind it. That's why I'm doing this. But one of my clients came to me and wanted to talk about taking a break from the podcast. And the reason I thought it would make a good episode to do is because it's that time of year. So I'm recording this now right at the end of November. So it's that time of year when people who work in inverted commas, normal jobs, talk about the time that they're going to be taking off. Whether if they're in the US, it's going to be all about Thanksgiving, or whether you're looking a bit further afield to Christmas in many places. And of course, there are myriad other celebrations and holidays and observances that happen in different countries. Thanksgiving and Christmas were just the first two that came to mind. It's not that I'm ignoring any of the others. Do those holidays, though, mean that you should take a break from your podcast? Now, if you've listened to this podcast for any length of time, you'll know that so many of the questions we pose kind of initially arrive at that thing of, well, it depends. And it's exactly the same with this. Because it depends on things like your availability, your commitment, your time. If you're going away for the holidays, or if you're going to be with friends and family and you're not going to be with your co-host or near your setup or anything, well, that's kind of making the decision for you. But if you've got a lot of commitment to your podcast, then you might go, yeah, I'm going to be away, but I'm going to take everything with me and I'll just record it wherever I am and I'll find some Wi-Fi to get on and still publish the episode. It all depends on those kind of things. And secondly, it does, as I've already talked about, it depends on your content as well. So if you're doing a podcast about knitting, which, again, if you've not heard before, is my default subject for a podcast, then carry on making it over Christmas. Because it's going to be nice and it's going to be informative. There's going to be plenty of people who are going to be getting wool and knitting patterns and needles and crochet books and knitting books and, you know, all kinds of things related to your podcast. They're going to be getting those over the festive period when there is that exchanging of gifts. So carry it on. If it is business related, though, your podcast, then personally, I would look at resting it over Christmas. And that is purely down to the fact that people want to take a break. And they should take a break over the festive season. Unless you work in a place where there is shifts and you've been rotated onto that shift and, well, that's the way it is. You know, if you have any decision in it, just take a break, as Alexander Hamilton was advised in the musical. Take a break, take a couple of days off or longer. however long you feel you can take off or, want to take off. And also, from my experience, the downloads and listening figures for business-based podcasts, they do take a little bit of a dip towards the end of the year because people are just kind of dialing out of that. As not everybody, and I'm sure if you're listening, you're going, well, my podcast isn't about my business, but I'm a business owner, and I don't take my foot off the gas until, the 24th of December. That's fine. Well done you. I'm just saying that there are some people who, as you get kind of the middle of November, they're already thinking of Christmas and they're just kind of slowing down a little bit, or their focus is on getting stuff ready for Christmas. So they don't have that time and commitment to listen to all of the business-based podcasts that they normally listen to. And this as well, this is one of those times when I would say it's okay to think about yourself. Because, as you know, if you've listened to any one of the, 15, 16 episodes that we've done of this so far, I am very much in favour of thinking of the listeners. And you shouldn't move too far away from that line of thinking anyway. But if you're in need of a break, then take it. Don't make the listeners an excuse for you keeping going over the festive period with something that you need to take a break from. Don't go, oh no, I've got to make a new episode. If you just think, actually, yeah, I just want to take a couple of weeks off, then take it. For the majority of people who are listening to this, you're not getting paid to do this. You're making the decisions. Yes, there are listeners that enjoy your content and will keep coming back and are loyal to the podcast. But they wouldn't want you to do something that you didn't want to do. The one thing I will say, though, with some sense of the definite, is that if you are going to take a break, don't forget to let the listeners know. Keep them informed. Remember that thing that I've said. Listeners love spontaneity, but they hate surprises. If they tune into your podcast one week and you've affected an accent, or there's kind of loads of sound effects throughout your podcast where you've never had any before, and you're not explaining it, they don't like that. But if in the middle of an episode you go, hey, I've just had a thought, let's bring in another person just for this episode, that's great. That's spontaneous. They really like that. And it's something which serves the listener. Just keep the listeners informed. Tell them what's going on. So let's just say the penultimate episode before the break, make a brief mention of the fact that you're going to be resting the podcast. And then, post about it a couple of times on social media, and then mention it in more detail on the final episode before the break. Whenever you do mention it, just keep in mind the fans of the podcast, that loyal tribe that you're building up. And the best way to do that is, if you're going to take a break, tell me when the break is over. Tell me when the return episode will be out. So something like, okay, podcast is going to be taking a bit of a rest for the next couple of weeks. We've got family coming over. We're going to be celebrating. I'm not really going to get time to record any new episodes. However, we're going to have a brand new episode out on January the 9th. So there's something to look forward to. Or something like that. And also, if your podcast does have a healthy, loyal following, don't worry. They're still going to be there when you come back. And just a final thing to keep in mind, if you are going to take a break, at any point, that's the thing. I know, we're referring to kind of end of year stuff, Thanksgiving and Christmas. For anything, I have a client that took a break over the summer. They did an episode in June and then they didn't do another one till September. They just took the summer off. That I have clients that take a couple of weeks off because they're going away and they just can't do that podcast in the same way. And they've not had the chance to pre-plan their episodes to take into account the holiday. So this isn't just all about end of the year break. It's any kind of break that you want to take. Let the listeners know. And the other thing to make sure of is, don't forget, schedule some social media posts whilst there's no new content coming out. Just remind people of the great content that you've produced in the past. Remembering, of course, as always, as we've said in previous episodes, give me a link to listen. Don't just tell me that you've got this great podcast. Give me the chance that with 1, maybe 2 clicks at most, I could be listening to your podcast. The other thing to bear in mind as well, and this is kind of Christmas specific, or, you know, any of the festivals that involve the exchanging of gifts, many people are going to be getting devices for listening to podcasts on for the very first time. So there is the potential for this whole new swathe of listeners that are going to be out there who are looking for something to start listening to. So do schedule those posts while you're off and kind of in the build-up to you coming back. Remember, please include links to listen to your podcast whenever you talk about it. I see it so many times, even now, of podcasts that go, yeah, we've got a great episode this week. You know, we talk about this, we talk about that, we talk about the other. Okay, great. Where? How can I listen to it? You know, they've not even told me where the podcast lives. So, wait a minute, why should I go digging around looking for your podcast? There's 1.5 million other ones I'll just go and have a listen to. And that's just on Apple. So schedule, include the links, and then just leave it to run. Just ticking over on itself while you take a well-deserved break. Okay. That's all for this episode. In the meantime, you can always get in touch. We've got the Facebook page. We're on Twitter and Instagram at PodcastPete2. Or you can always email therealpodcastpete@gmail.com. And don't forget, genuinely, if you've got a new podcast coming out, tag me in or send it to us. Or if you're, launching a new one, and I will share the heck right out of it and let as many people as possible know that they should be listening to your new podcast. All right. Stay safe, guys. Happy podcasting, and I'll see you next time.
This has been a Monkey Pants Productions podcast.